The town square was draped in gray that Tuesday afternoon, both from the overcast sky and the collective grief that hung in the air. I adjusted the collar of my black dress as I approached the gathering, feeling the weight of the occasion press against my chest. Willow Creek had always been a place where people left their doors unlocked and borrowed sugar without hesitation, but today there was something different in the air, something that made my skin prickle despite the warm May breeze. Gerald Doyle, Jerry to his friends, which was pretty much everyone, was being memorialized with folding chairs arranged in neat rows, flower arrangements in somber colors, and faces wearing expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. He had been my neighbor for 30 years, my friend for nearly as long, and somehow, in this town that had slowly started to change beneath our feet, my only true ally. I took a seat in the second row, nodding politely to Martha Sullivan, who patted the empty chair next to her. The pastor stood near the closed casket, shuffling his notes and clearing his throat. I scanned the crowd, noting the faces of neighbors I'd known for decades, faces that now seemed like masks worn by strangers. As the pastor raised his hand to begin the eulogy, a man I didn't recognize approached me quietly from the side. He wore a weathered brown coat despite the warmth of the day, and carried a leather satchel that had seen better years. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, and he didn't look at me directly as he leaned down. "He's not in the casket," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "He's not dead." Before I could respond, he slipped a crumpled envelope into my hand and melted back into the crowd. I stared at the envelope, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. My hands trembled as I carefully opened it, trying not to draw attention. The handwriting inside was shaky but unmistakable. I'd seen it on birthday cards and Christmas. Notes for 3 decades. It was Jerry's. "B. If you're reading this, it means they think I'm gone. But I'm not. I had to disappear. Don and Karen, they know. And they're hiding something awful. Please don't trust them. Go to the shed behind the old maple tree. You'll find the truth. G." I gasped, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the letter. I quickly folded it and tucked it into my purse, my mind racing with impossible thoughts. Jerry wasn't dead? The closed casket before us was empty? And Don and Karen, our neighbors, pillars of the community, were hiding something terrible? I looked up, searching the crowd for the man in the weathered coat, but he had vanished completely. Instead, my eyes locked with Karen Whitmore's. She stood across the lawn, her arms wrapped around her husband Don's waist in a display of spousal solidarity that had always seemed just a touch too rehearsed. But it was her eyes that sent ice through my veins. They were fixed on me with a chilling calm, like she knew exactly what had just happened. Her red-painted lips curved into what others might mistake for a sympathetic smile, but I saw the calculation behind it. I forced myself to look away, to breathe normally as the pastor began speaking about a man who apparently wasn't even dead. My mind drifted back through the years, trying to pinpoint when things in Willow Creek had begun to change. It had been 2 years ago, hadn't it? After John passed away, leaving me alone in our house at the end of Maple Street. I'd found solace in my garden and in the weekly tea sessions with Jerry, who spent his retirement fixing clocks no one used anymore and listening to vinyl records from another era. We'd sit on his porch, watching the neighborhood and reminiscing about simpler times. Those were the days before Don Carlisle, our former HOA president, started buying properties throughout the neighborhood. Before Karen Whitmore's block parties became mandatory social assessments. Before neighbors started moving away under mysterious circumstances, their homes quickly renovated and sold to wealthy newcomers from the city. "Beatrice," Martha whispered beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at the irony. A ghost? That's exactly what I might have encountered. The ghost of a man who wasn't dead at all. "I'm fine," I lied, patting her hand. "Just remembering." The service continued, a parade of neighbors stepping up to share anecdotes about Jerry that sounded rehearsed and hollow. I noticed that none of them mentioned his stubborn streak, his suspicion of authority, or how he'd begun to voice concerns about the changes in our town. They painted a picture of a sweet, doddering old man who had quietly expired, not the sharp-minded retired engineer who had told me just 3 weeks ago that he thought someone had been breaking into his shed at night. When it was over, I stood to leave, eager to get home and process what I'd learned. But Karen intercepted me, her manicured hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Beatrice, darling," she said, her voice honey-sweet and her eyes hard as flint. Dawn and I are hosting a small gathering at our home after this. We'd love for you to come. After all, you and Jerry were so close. There was something in the way she emphasized were that made my blood run cold. I don't think I'm up for it, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I should get home. Of course, Karen said, her smile never wavering. You must be exhausted. Grief. Does that, doesn't it? Makes us see and hear strange things sometimes. My heart missed a beat. Had she seen the man give me the letter? Did she know what it contained? I'm fine, really, I insisted, gently pulling my arm from her grasp. Just tired. As I walked away, I felt her eyes boring into my back. The letter in my purse seemed to burn against my side. Jerry's shed behind the maple tree. The truth was waiting there, and so were answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask until today. What I didn't know then, as I drove home from that mockery of a memorial, was that I was about to uncover secrets that would tear the facade of Willow Creek wide open, and that some of my neighbors would do anything to keep those secrets buried, just like the empty casket we'd gathered around. Today, I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows made me jump. Jerry's letter lay on my kitchen table, illuminated by the single overhead light I'd left on, as some pathetic defense against the darkness that suddenly seemed to fill every corner of my home. He's not dead, I whispered to myself, testing the words against reality. It seemed impossible. Karen had announced at the town meeting last week that Jerry had passed away peacefully in his sleep while visiting relatives in Idaho. There had been no reason to doubt her. She was, after all, the unofficial keeper of Willow Creek's social calendar and community news. When she said something, people believed it. But now, I picked up the letter again, running my fingers over the familiar handwriting. This was definitely Jerry's script, slightly shaky from arthritis, but with the precise angles of someone who'd spent decades drafting engineering plans. This wasn't a forgery. Somehow, someway, Jerry Doyle was alive. At 2:17 a.m., I made my decision. I couldn't wait until morning. I had to know. I dressed in dark clothes, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped out my back door. The neighborhood was silent, with only a few porch lights glowing in the darkness. Jerry's house sat 2 doors down from mine, its windows dark and curtains drawn. The porch light still burned, exactly as it had since the day he supposedly died. I crept around the side of his property, grateful for the mature trees and shrubs that provided cover. The old maple tree stood at the back corner of his lot, its massive trunk and spreading branches a landmark in our neighborhood. Beneath it sat the small weathered shed, where Jerry kept his tools and tinkered with his clock repairs. The shed door was locked, as expected. I swept my flashlight beam across the ground nearby, remembering how Jerry always kept a spare key hidden in plain sight, where only a friend would know to look. There, beneath, a cracked clay pot with a struggling fern. A small rusted key gleamed in the flashlight's beam. My hands shook as I unlocked the shed and slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The familiar smell of motor oil, old wood, and Jerry's pipe tobacco wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. I played my flashlight around the small space, workbench against one wall, shelves of old, clocks and radios against another, garden tools hanging from hooks along the back. Nothing seemed out of place or suspicious. Had I misunderstood the letter? Was this all some elaborate hoax? Then my light caught the edge of something metal beneath the workbench. Kneeling down, I found a toolbox. Not one of Jerry's usual battered containers, but a newer fireproof document box with a combination lock. Taped to its top was a note in Jerry's handwriting. If something happens to me, this is why. My heart raced as I pulled the box out. The combination lock was set to 7/15/42, July 15th, 1942, Jerry's birthday. He'd once told me he used it for everything because, at my age, I can't be remembering different codes for every damn thing in life. Inside the box lay a neatly organized collection of documents, several mini cassette tapes labeled with dates, and a USB stick. On top was another note from Jerry. B. I pray you never have to open this box. If you're reading this, I've either disappeared or they're saying I'm dead. Neither is an accident. What you'll find here is everything I've discovered about Don Carlisle's urban renewal project and what's really happening in Willow Creek. Be careful. Trust no one except Martha Sullivan. She knows parts of this too. Jerry. With trembling hands, I began to look through the documents. Property deeds with signatures that didn't match their owners. Letters threatening code violations that were never actually filed with the county. Photographs of Dawn meeting with men in expensive suits at the abandoned factory outside of town. But what made my blood run cold were the transcripts Jerry had meticulously typed up from recorded conversations. According to these, Don Carlisle wasn't just buying properties. He was systematically forcing elderly residents out through intimidation, forged documents, and what appeared to be outright fraud. And Karen Whitmore, our neighborhood's social butterfly, was his accomplice. She used her position as the community's unofficial information hub to monitor who was vulnerable, who was suspicious, and who needed to be dealt with. The transcripts suggested she'd been tampering with mail, including medical notices and legal documents, to further their scheme. A handwritten note from Jerry explained the most damning evidence. On the USB drive is a recording I made when Don didn't know. I was in my garden shed. He was talking to someone about me, saying I was becoming a problem and needed to be handled. The other voice suggested making me disappear permanently. That's when I knew I had to act first. I sat back on my heels, my mind reeling. Jerry had discovered a criminal conspiracy operating in our peaceful suburb and had faked his own death to escape it. But why leave this evidence behind? Why not take it to the police? A notation at the bottom of his final note answered my question. Tried going to Sheriff Reynolds. He's Don's brother-in-law. Wouldn't even look at my evidence. Said I was a confused old man. That's when I knew how deep this goes. The county commissioner, the building inspector, half the town council, they're all in on it somehow. As I carefully repacked the box, a floorboard creaked outside the shed. I froze, dousing my flashlight immediately. Through the small, dirty window, I could make out a figure moving across Jerry's backyard, heading straight for the shed. My heart pounding in my ears, I slid the box back under the workbench and pressed myself into the darkest corner, behind a stack of old paint cans. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A key rattled in the lock. The door swung open, and in the ambient moonlight, I recognized the silhouette immediately. Don Carlisle, with a flashlight in one hand and what looked alarmingly like a gun in the other. I held my breath as Don stepped into the shed, the beam of his flashlight sweeping over the workbench. I pressed myself deeper into the corner, praying. The stack of paint cans would conceal me. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready for discovery. Anything? Karen's voice came from just outside the door, making me start. Not yet, Don muttered, moving methodically through the small space. But he had to have left it somewhere. The old fool was too meticulous to destroy everything. Karen stepped inside, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. She wore dark clothing, practical, unlike her usual floral dresses and pearls. This is the third time we've searched. Maybe he took it all with him. No, Don said firmly. He left in a hurry. There's something here. I can feel it. His flashlight beam moved across the floor, inching closer to the workbench where Jerry's metal box lay hidden. I closed my eyes, certain this was it. They would find the box, then find me, and who knew what would happen next. But then a distant sound saved me. A car door slamming somewhere nearby. Damn it, Karen hissed. That's Mrs. Peterson's son. He works nights at the hospital. Don's light immediately clicked off. We'll come back tomorrow. The memorial's over. People will stop watching this place so closely now. They slipped out as quietly as they had come, locking the shed door behind them. I stayed frozen in my hiding spot, barely breathing, until I was certain they were gone. Then I collapsed against the wall, shaking with delayed terror. They were looking for Jerry's evidence. They suspected it existed but hadn't found it yet, and they were willing to break into a supposedly dead man's property in the middle of the night to search for it. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't leave without the box. Fumbling in the dark, I retrieved it from under the workbench and tucked it under my arm. Using my phone's dim light, I found an old canvas tarp and wrapped the box inside it, disguising it as just another bundle of junk. Unlocking the shed door, I peered out cautiously. The yard was empty, no sign of Don or Karen. I slipped out, relocked the door, and replaced the key under the pot. Then, hugging the shadows of fence lines and hedges, I made my way home, expecting at any moment to hear Don's voice or see Karen's sharp silhouette materialize from the darkness. Back in my kitchen, with doors locked and curtains drawn, I examined my stolen treasure more carefully. The documents painted a damning picture. Don had started buying properties 3 years ago, focusing on homes owned by elderly residents or those in financial distress. but it went beyond simple predatory real estate practices. According to Jerry's notes, Don was working with a development corporation called Meridian Partners. They needed to acquire 75% of the properties in Willow Creek to move forward with a massive commercial development. A development that would turn our sleepy residential neighborhood into a complex of high-end shops, restaurants, and condominiums. But the real bombshell was on one of the cassette tapes. Jerry had recorded a town council meeting where, in a closed executive session, Don had revealed that the land beneath Willow Creek contained valuable mineral deposits. A mining company was willing to pay millions for extraction rights, money that would go to Meridian Partners and its investors, not the homeowners who would be displaced. As dawn broke over my kitchen window, I sat surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that threatened everything and everyone I had known for decades. My home, my community, the very ground beneath our feet. I knew I should be terrified, and part of me was, but another. Emotion was rising within me. Anger. Righteous. Clarifying anger. Jerry had trusted me with this information. He had risked everything to document what was happening. Now it was my turn to act. But I couldn't do it alone. Jerry's note had mentioned one person I could trust. Martha Sullivan. The thought gave me pause. Martha had lived in Willow Creek even longer than I had. She'd taught at the C elementary school for 40 years before retiring, and knew everyone in town. She also happened to be the only person who routinely stood up to Karen at community meetings. I waited until a reasonable hour, then called her. "Beatrice?" Martha answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to you," I said, choosing my words carefully. "About Jerry, and some things he left behind." There was a long pause. "Come over for coffee," she finally said. "Use the back door." Martha's Victorian house sat on a corner lot at the edge of the neighborhood. I approached from the alley, the metal box hidden in my large knitting bag. When I knocked softly at her back door, it opened immediately. "You weren't followed?" Martha asked, peering past me into the alley. "I don't think so." "Martha, what's going on? Did you know about all this?" She ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. "Parts of it. Jerry came to me about 3 months ago, very upset. He showed me some of what he'd found. I helped him make copies of the documents, but I didn't know he was planning to disappear." We sat at her kitchen table, and I showed her the contents of the box. Martha examined each piece methodically, her former teacher's precision evident in the way she organized the evidence as she reviewed it. "This is worse than I thought," she finally said, removing her reading glasses. "Jerry was right. This goes beyond simple real estate fraud. These people are dangerous, Beatrice. But why target our neighborhood? And why go to such extremes?" Martha sighed. "Money, power, the usual motivations. But there's something else." She pulled out a map from the bottom of the box that I hadn't examined closely. "Look at this." Jerry marked the properties that have been sold to Don or his associates in the past 3 years. I studied the map. The marked houses formed a distinct pattern, a roughly circular area centered on the old community park. "What's under the park?" I asked, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. That's what Jerry was trying to find out when he disappeared. He suspected it was more than just the mineral deposits mentioned at that council meeting. Martha leaned forward. "The night before he died, he called me. Said he was meeting someone who had information about what was really happening. He sounded excited, like he'd finally figured it all out. That was the last time I spoke to him." I felt a chill. And the next day, Karen announced he had died in Idaho. Martha nodded grimly. "Too convenient, wouldn't you say?" "But he's not dead," I said, pulling out his letter. "He sent me this, at the memorial." Martha read it, her eyes widening. "This changes everything. If Jerry is alive, he can testify about what he found. We need to find him." "How? We have no idea where he went." "Perhaps we do." Martha pointed to the letter. "He says he had to disappear because Dawn and Karen know." "Know what? What was so important that he had to fake his own death?" I thought about the map, the circular pattern of purchased properties. "Whatever is under the park, whatever they're really after." Martha nodded. "And I think I know how to find out what that is. My nephew works for the county records office. He can access geological surveys, historical property records, everything." For the first time since receiving Jerry's letter, I felt a spark of hope. We had evidence. We had a plan. We could expose Dawn and Karen's scheme and find Jerry. But as I left Martha's house that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Dawn and Karen were still searching for Jerry's evidence. How long before they realized someone else had found it first? I spent the next day trying to act normal, watering my garden and nodding to neighbors as if my entire understanding of our community hadn't been shattered. Inside, my mind raced with questions. Was Mrs. Peterson across the street involved? What about the Johnsons on the corner? How far did this conspiracy reach? Around noon, Karen appeared at my front gate, a casserole dish in hand, and that calculated smile fixed on her face. "Beatrice, darling," she called, "I brought you some lunch. I know how hard yesterday must have been for you." I forced myself to smile as I met her at the gate. "That's very thoughtful. May I come in? I'd love to check on how you're doing." Her eyes darted past me toward my house, searching. "Actually, I was just heading out. Doctor's appointment." The lie came easily, surprising me. "Oh, I don't remember you mentioning that at book club last week." Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "It was a last-minute thing. Just a checkup." Karen pressed the casserole into my hands. "Well, take this anyway. It's my famous chicken divan. Jerry always loved it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, did Jerry ever mention anything to you about his concerns? About the neighborhood changes?" My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. "Not really. We mostly talked about gardening and his clock collection." Karen studied my face. "It's just that Dawn mentioned seeing Jerry talking to you quite intensely the week before he passed. Seemed like a serious conversation." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "He was probably just complaining about the Jensen boys' music again. You know how he was about noise." Karen's laugh sounded hollow. "Yes, our dear Jerry was quite particular. Well, enjoy the casserole. And Beatrice?" Her hand gripped my arm. Again, just as it had at the memorial. "If you need anything at all, Dawn and I are right here. We take care of our own in Willow Creek." The threat beneath her words was unmistakable. As soon as she left, I dumped the casserole in the trash. Who knew what might be in it? Paranoid, perhaps, but after what I'd discovered, I wasn't taking chances. My phone rang. Martha. "My nephew came through," she said without preamble. "Can you come over? Use the back way again." 20 minutes later, I was seated at Martha's kitchen table, staring at maps and documents spread before us. "It's worse than we thought," Martha said, pointing to an old geological survey. "There's a significant aquifer under Willow Creek, one of the largest in the region, and with the drought conditions worsening. Each year—" "Water rights," I breathed, understanding immediately. "They're after water rights." Martha nodded grimly. "Exactly, but that's not all. Look at this." She showed me a historical document from the county archives, a deed restriction placed on the land where our neighborhood now stood. Dating back to 1925, it specified that the land was to remain residential in perpetuity, with specific provisions protecting the water resources beneath. The only way around this restriction is if 75% of property owners agree to dissolve it, Martha explained. That's why Dawn has been buying up houses, not just for the development potential, but to control the voting rights on any proposal to change the deed restriction. And once they control the restriction, they can sell the water. Rights to the highest bidder, I finished, the full picture finally coming into focus. In the middle of the worst drought in 50 years, that's worth millions, Martha confirmed. Maybe tens of millions. So when Jerry started asking questions, he became a liability, especially if he found proof of how they've been acquiring those properties. Martha tapped another document, a list of homeowners who had sold to Dawn in the past year. My nephew checked. 3 of these people claim they never signed sales documents. Their signatures were forged. I thought of the elderly residents who had moved away suddenly, Mrs. Fitzgerald, who could barely remember her grandchildren's names, Mr. Jenkins, who'd been developing dementia, the Parkers, who'd been struggling financially after medical bills. "They're targeting the vulnerable," I said. "People who might not notice discrepancies in paperwork or who could be easily pressured." "Exactly. And Karen's position as the neighborhood busybody gives her perfect cover to keep tabs on who's struggling, who's ill, who might be an easy mark." "We need to go to the authorities," I said. Martha shook her head. "Sheriff Reynolds is Dawn's brother-in-law, remember? And according to Jerry's notes, the county commissioner is an investor in Meridian Partners. We need irrefutable evidence and witnesses willing to testify." "Like Jerry," I said. "We need to find him." Martha pulled out another document, a property record for a small cabin near Lake Windermere, about 2 hours north. This might be where he went. The cabin is owned by a Gregory Daniels, Jerry's middle name and his mother's maiden name. It was purchased 6 months ago, right around when Jerry started collecting evidence. Hope surged through me. He planned his escape, created a safe house. It's worth checking out, Martha agreed. But we need to be careful. If Dawn and Karen realize what we're doing, they won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. I'll go tomorrow. I'll tell everyone I'm visiting my sister in Portland for a few days. Martha nodded. Good. While you're gone, I'll contact some of the homeowners on this list, see if any of them are willing to come forward about the forged documents. As I gathered my things to leave, Martha gripped my hand. Be careful, Beatrice. These people have already proven they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their scheme. I will, I promised, but I'm not going to let them destroy our home. Jerry trusted me with this, and I won't let him down. Back at my house, I packed a small bag and made arrangements for my neighbor's teenage daughter to water my plants while I was visiting my sister. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote everything I knew in a sealed letter, addressed to my actual sister in Arizona with instructions to open it if she didn't hear from me in a week. Insurance, just in case. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a car idling outside my house. Peering through the curtains, I saw Don's black SUV parked across the street, his silhouette visible behind the wheel. Watching, waiting. They suspected something. The clock was ticking. Dawn was just breaking when I left Willow Creek, fog hanging low over the quiet streets. I'd waited until Dawn's SUV finally departed around 2 a.m., then set my alarm for 5:30. Better to leave while the neighborhood slept. My ancient Honda Civic wasn't built for stealth, but I coasted down the driveway with the engine off, not starting it until I'd rolled to the corner. The highway stretched before me, empty, in the early morning light. I kept checking my rearview mirror, paranoid about being followed. 2 hours of driving lay ahead. 2 hours to rehearse what I would say to Jerry if I found him. Would he be angry that I'd gotten involved? Relieved? What if he wasn't at the cabin at all? As the miles passed, the landscape changed from suburbs to farmland to forest. Lake Windermere was a popular vacation spot in summer, but in early May, before the season began, it would be quiet. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. I stopped for gas at a small station about 20 miles from the lake, stretching my legs and buying a cup of mediocre coffee. The attendant, an older man with a grizzled beard, glanced up from his newspaper. Heading to the lake? He asked conversationally. Yes, I replied, not volunteering more information. Early in the season for tourists. His eyes were shrewd, assessing. I'm visiting a friend, I said, keeping my tone light. He moved up here recently. Ah, the man nodded. We've had a few new folks move in. Quiet types mostly. Keep to themselves. He studied me for a moment. Your friend wouldn't happen to be that older gentleman in the Daniels. Cabin? Gray hair? Always fixing things? My heart skipped. That sounds like him. The attendant smiled. Nice fella. Helped me fix my generator last month when the power went out. Said he used to be an engineer. Relief washed over me. Jerry was alive. He was at the cabin. And he was still fixing things. Once an engineer, always an engineer. Which road leads to the Daniels cabin? I asked, trying to sound casual. Take Lakeshore Drive about 3 miles past the marina, then turn right on Pine Creek Road. It's the third cabin on the left, blue with white trim. I thanked him and hurried back to my car, newfound energy propelling me forward. 20 minutes later, I turned onto Pine Creek Road, a narrow gravel track that wound through tall pines. My hands gripped the steering wheel, tightly as I counted cabins. 1, 2, 3. A small blue structure with white trim, partially hidden by trees. I parked and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. There was an old truck in the driveway that I didn't recognize, but smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. The wooden steps creaked as I approached the front door. I took a deep breath and knocked. Silence. Then, footsteps. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain. One blue eye peered out, widened in shock, then disappeared as the door slammed shut. I heard the rattling of the chain, and then the door flung open wide. "B?" Jerry Doyle stood before me, very much alive, his face pale with surprise. "What in God's name are you doing here?" He looked thinner than I remembered, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. His silver hair was longer, and he'd grown a beard that made him almost unrecognizable from a distance. But his eyes, sharp, intelligent, kind, were unmistakably Jerry's. "You're not dead," I said stupidly, emotion suddenly overwhelming me. Jerry glanced nervously past me, scanning the road. "Get inside, quickly." He ushered me in, locking the door behind us. The cabin was small, but cozy. A main room with a kitchenette and living area, a door leading presumably to a bedroom, and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled. "How did you find me?" he demanded, his voice a mix of wonder and concern. "Your letter," I said, "at the memorial, and the evidence in your shed." Martha helped me piece it together. Jerry sank into an armchair, running a hand through his hair. "I should have known you'd figure it out. You always were too smart for your own good." He looked up at me, his expression grave. "But you shouldn't have come, Bea. It's not safe. These people, what they're involved in, it's bigger than just Dawn and Karen." "I know," I said, sitting across from him. "The water rights, the forged documents, the mineral deposits. We found it all." He nodded grimly. "Then, you understand why I had to disappear. They were going to kill me, Bea. I overheard them planning it, talking about making it look like an accident. But faking your own death? How did you even manage it?" Jerry's lips twitched in a ghost of his old smile. "Remember my friend Ted from Idaho? The one who owed me a favor after I helped him rebuild that '57 Chevy? When I nodded, he continued. "He agreed to tell anyone who called that I died peacefully in my sleep while visiting. We sent the obituary to the local paper from his address. Karen took care of the rest. She was so eager to announce my death that she never even asked for a death certificate. But the memorial, the casket? Empty, I assume?" Jerry shrugged. "I knew they'd want to make it look official to stop people from asking questions, but I never thought they'd go to the trouble of a full memorial service." "It was Karen's idea," I said. "She organized everything. Closed casket, of course." "Of course." He shook his head. "It's almost flattering how desperately they want me gone." We sat in silence for a moment, the fire popping in the hearth. Finally, I leaned forward. "Jerry, we need to stop them. They're getting closer to the 75% they need. Once they control enough properties, they'll sell the water rights and destroy the neighborhood," he finished. "I know, that's why I've been gathering evidence. But we need more than just documents, Bea. We need someone on the inside willing to testify." "Like who?" Jerry's eyes gleamed. "Like Melissa Carlisle." I stared at him. "Dawn's ex-wife?" I thought. "She moved away years ago." "She did, to escape him. But we've been in contact." He stood and went to a drawer, pulling out a folder. "She has financial records showing where the money from Meridian Partners really comes from. It's not just local investors. There's a multinational corporation involved, one with a history of exploiting natural resources and leaving communities devastated." As Jerry spread the documents on the coffee table, I saw what we were really up against. Not just greedy neighbors, but a corporate giant with billions at stake. "Melissa is willing to testify," Jerry continued. "But she's afraid. Dawn was abusive. She barely escaped with her life the first time." "Where is she now?" "Safe house in Seattle. She's been helping me remotely, sending documents when she can. Access them without raising suspicion." I studied the papers. Bank statements, corporate filings, emails. Combined with what we'd already found, it painted a damning picture. But would it be enough? "We need to get this to the state attorney general," I said. "Bypass the local authorities completely." Jerry nodded. "That's the plan. But first we need one more piece. Proof that Dawn and his corporate backers knew about the contamination." "Contamination?" I echoed, confused. "What contamination?" Jerry's face darkened. "That's what I discovered the night before I disappeared. It's not just water they're after, Bea. The aquifer beneath Willow Creek is contaminated with industrial chemicals from the old factory site. They've known for years, but kept it quiet. Their plan is to buy up the land, sell the water rights to an unsuspecting buyer, and be long gone before anyone discovers the water is toxic." Horror washed over me. "They're going to poison people. For profit," Jerry confirmed grimly. "And when the contamination is eventually discovered, property values will plummet. The residents who refuse to sell will be left with worthless land and potential health problems." "We have to stop them," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. "Today." Jerry squeezed my hand. "We will. But we need to be smart about this. They've already tried to kill me once. They won't hesitate to come after you too if they realize what you know." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Dawn and Karen at your house looking for you. Said it's urgent. Be careful." I showed Jerry the message. a chill running down my spine. They know I'm gone. But they don't know where you are, he reassured me. Not yet. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Martha. Karen asking if you mentioned going to a cabin. I said no. Something's wrong. Jerry and I locked eyes, the same realization hitting us both. We need to leave, he said, already moving to gather the documents. Now. We left everything but the essential documents, piling into Jerry's old truck rather than my more recognizable Honda. As we pulled away from the cabin, I glanced back, wondering if I'd see Dawn's black SUV coming up the road behind us. But the road remained empty, for now. Where are we going? I asked as Jerry drove, his hands tight on the wheel. First, to pick up Melissa in Seattle. Then, to the State Attorney General's office in Olympia. I have a contact there, someone I trust. He glanced at me. I'm sorry I got you involved in this, B. I got myself involved when I opened that metal box, I replied. Besides, Willow Creek is my home too. I wasn't going to let them destroy it without a fight. Jerry nodded, a hint of his old smile returning. You always were stubborn. Almost. As stubborn as me. The drive to Seattle took us through winding mountain roads and eventually onto the interstate. Jerry remained vigilant, checking the rearview mirror regularly, occasionally taking unexpected exits only to get back on the highway a few miles later, making sure we weren't being followed. How did they know? I asked as we approached the outskirts of Seattle. About the cabin, Jerry sighed. I've been wondering that myself. The property is registered under a different name. The only people who knew I was there were Ted and... He trailed off, his expression darkening. And who? I prompted. James Peterson, he admitted reluctantly. Mrs. Peterson's son, the one who works nights at the hospital. The one who interrupted Dawn and Karen when they were searching. Your shed, I realized. You trust him? I did. He helped me set up the Gregory Daniels identity. But if Dawn got to him somehow... Jerry shook his head. It doesn't matter now. They know where the cabin is, which means they might be right behind us. An hour later, we pulled up to an unassuming apartment building in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. Jerry texted someone, and moments later, a woman emerged from the front entrance, petite, with dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes that had seen too much. Melissa Carlisle was nothing like I'd imagined Dawn's ex-wife would be. Where he was loud and commanding, she was quiet and watchful, but there was a steel in her gaze that spoke of hard-won strength. Gerald, she said, climbing into the truck beside me. You brought a friend. This is... Beatrice Monroe, Jerry introduced me. She's the one who found the evidence I left behind. Melissa studied me, then nodded. Thank you. Not many people would have the courage to stand up to Dawn. Did you bring the files? Jerry asked her. She patted her bag. Everything, including the emails where he explicitly acknowledges the contamination reports and instructs his team to bury them. Her voice held no emotion, just flat certainty. He'll go to prison for this. They all will. As Jerry drove toward Olympia, Melissa and I compared notes, piecing together the full extent of Dawn's scheme. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing than I'd initially realized. He's done this before, Melissa explained, in 3 other communities. Buy up land, extract resources, leave environmental devastation behind. But this is the first time he's gone after water rights during a drought. The potential profits are exponentially higher. And Karen? I asked. How does she fit into all this? She's sharper than Dawn, Melissa said grimly. More calculating. She finds the weak spots in communities, the vulnerable residents, the pressure points. In Willow Creek, she cultivated her image as the neighborhood matriarch, but it was all about information gathering. Who was struggling financially, who was developing health problems, who might be easily manipulated. I thought of all the times Karen had organized meal trains for sick neighbors, book clubs for the elderly, welcome parties for newcomers. All opportunities to assess and categorize potential targets. We're going to stop them, I said, more to myself than to Melissa. They won't get away with this. She gave me a sad smile. I hope you're right, but Dawn has powerful friends, and he doesn't like to lose. We reached Olympia by mid-afternoon. Jerry's contact at the Attorney General's office, a serious-faced woman named Diana Jang, listened to our story without interruption, examining each piece of evidence methodically. This is substantial, she finally said, looking up from the documents. Enough for us to open a formal investigation and seek warrants. How long will that take? Jerry asked. Normally weeks, she admitted. But given the imminent threat to public health and the evidence of multiple felonies, I can expedite it. Give me 48 hours to assemble a team. We may not have 48 hours, Melissa said quietly. Once Don realizes I'm involved, he'll know exactly what evidence I have. He'll either run or try to eliminate the threat. Diana considered this, then picked up her phone. Let me see what I can do to speed things up. In the meantime, you three should stay somewhere safe, not a hotel. Do you have somewhere you can go? We exchanged glances, realizing we hadn't thought that far ahead. My sister, I offered. She lives in Tacoma. We could stay with her. Diana nodded. Go there. Keep your phones on, but don't use them unless necessary. And don't return to Willow Creek under any circumstances. If Don Carlyle is as dangerous as you say, he won't hesitate to silence you permanently. As we left the building, the gravity of our situation sank in. We were essentially in hiding, having just handed over evidence that could send our neighbors to prison for decades. There was no going back to our quiet lives in Willow Creek. Not until this was over. My sister Rachel welcomed us without asking too many questions, setting up her guest room for Jerry and the sofa bed for Melissa. That night, as we sat around her kitchen table eating takeout Chinese food, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. We'd done it. We'd gotten the evidence to the authorities. But the danger wasn't over. What happens now? Rachel asked after we'd explained the basics of our situation. We wait, Jerry said, and hope Diana works quickly. Later, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know where you are. This can still end. Quietly, if you return what you took. Last chance. I showed it to Jerry, my hands shaking. They're bluffing, he said, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. They can't know we're here. But as I lay awake that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my sister's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somehow Don was always one step ahead of us. And I wondered what price we would ultimately pay for the truth. Morning came with rain drumming against the windows of Rachel's house. I had barely slept, jumping at every creak and shadow. Jerry looked no better, his eyes rimmed with fatigue as he nursed a cup of black coffee at the kitchen table. I keep thinking about that text, I said, pouring myself a cup. How could they know we're here? Melissa joined. Us, her expression grim. Don has connections everywhere. Private investigators, corrupt officials. He's tracked me across 3 states before. Rachel entered, already dressed for work. I called in sick today. Thought I should stay with you all, given the circumstances. You shouldn't miss work because of our problems, I protested. Family comes first, she said firmly. Besides, I'd rather be here if anything happens. The unspoken fear hung in the air, that Don might make good on his implied threat. My phone rang, startling us all. It was Diana Zhang. Ms. Monroe? Things are moving faster than expected. We've obtained emergency warrants based on the evidence you provided, particularly the contamination reports. We're coordinating with the EPA and state environmental agencies for a raid on Meridian Partners' offices today. Hope surged through me. That's wonderful news. There's more, Diana continued. We've also secured warrants for Don Carlyle and Karen Whitmore's residences and personal records. But here's where it gets complicated. They seem to have disappeared overnight. My blood ran cold. Disappeared? Their homes were empty when officers arrived this morning. Neighbors reported seeing them loading suitcases into their cars late last night. We've issued a BOLO. Be on the lookout, but they could be anywhere by now. I glanced at Jerry and Melissa, seeing my own fear reflected in their faces. Don and Karen were in the wind, and possibly hunting for us. What should we do? I asked Diana. Stay where you are. We're sending officers to secure your location. In the meantime, be vigilant. These people have a lot to lose, which makes them dangerous. After hanging up, I relayed the information to the others. They're running, Jerry said, a note of bitter triumph in his voice. They know it's over. Or they're coming for us, Melissa countered softly. Don doesn't run from problems. He eliminates them. Rachel moved to the window, peering through the blinds. I don't see anything suspicious outside, but maybe we should move away from the windows, just in case. We retreated to the interior hallway, an awkward huddle of frightened people waiting for either protection or disaster to arrive first. I never thought it would come to this, I admitted. When I found your letter, Jerry, I just wanted to know the truth. I never imagined we'd end up hiding from our neighbors like characters in some thriller movie. Jerry patted my hand. Truth has a cost, B. Always has. But letting them poison our community would have cost even more. Melissa checked her watch. How long until the officers arrive? Diana didn't say exactly. Soon, I hope. Minutes stretched into an hour. Rachel made more coffee. We spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories about Willow Creek, the good memories, before Dawn's scheme had poisoned everything. Then we heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Rachel peeked through the side window. A black SUV, she whispered. 2 people inside. My heart raced. Is it them? I can't tell. They're still in the vehicle. Jerry moved beside her, squinting through the narrow gap in the curtains. His face went pale. It's Dawn, and that's not Karen with him. It's James Peterson. I felt sick. James had been the leak all along, the connection between our safe cabin and Dawn's pursuit. The back door, Rachel said suddenly. We can go through the yard to the Andersons' house next door. We moved quickly, gathering only our phones and the copies of evidence we'd kept. Rachel led us through the kitchen toward the rear exit, but as she reached for the doorknob, it turned from the outside. We froze in horror as the door swung open, revealing Karen Whitmore, a pistol steady in her manicured hand. Going somewhere? She asked, her smile as artificial as ever. I'm afraid we need to have a conversation first. Dawn appeared behind her, James Peterson hovering uncertainly in the background. Dawn's usual bluster was gone, replaced by a cold determination that was far more frightening. Sit down, he ordered, gesturing to the kitchen chairs. All of you. We complied, having little choice with Karen's gun trained on us. Dawn paced the kitchen, radiating controlled fury. You know, he said conversationally, I always thought you were harmless, Beatrice, the quiet widow who kept to herself. And you, Jerry, the doddering old clockmaker. I underestimated you both. We know everything, Dawn, Jerry said, his voice steadier than I expected. About the water rights, the contamination, all of it. The Attorney General has the evidence. Dawn's smile was chilling. Of course she does. And by the time her team finishes executing their warrants, they'll find nothing. Digital records can be so easily altered, you know. Paper documents burn quite efficiently. There are copies, I said. Multiple copies, in multiple locations. So you say. Dawn leaned against the counter. But here's what's going to happen now. You're going to tell us exactly what evidence you provided and to whom. Then you're going to sign statements recanting everything, claiming it was all a, misunderstanding. A vendetta against the HOA, perhaps. And why would we do that? Melissa spoke up, staring defiantly at her ex-husband. Dawn's eyes hardened as they landed on her. Because if you don't, this ends badly for all of you. A murder-suicide, perhaps. The stress of false accusations drove you to desperate measures. It's sad, really. The casual way he threatened our lives made my blood run cold. This man had been my neighbor for years. I'd attended his barbecues, contributed to his charity drives. Now he was discussing our murders as if planning a business transaction. The police are on their way, Rachel said. You won't get away with this. Karen laughed softly. The police are dealing with a major pileup on the interstate. Anonymous tip about a drunk driver. They'll be tied. Up for hours. My mind raced, searching for options. Stall them? Fight back? 4 of us against 3 of them. But they had a gun. Why, Dawn? I asked, trying to buy time. Why go to these lengths? You were already successful, respected in the community. He shrugged. Business is business. Do you have any idea what water rights are worth in this drought? Hundreds of millions, maybe billions. Eventually. The contamination is unfortunate but manageable. A problem for whoever buys the rights, not for us. People will die, Jerry said quietly. You're talking about poisoning an entire water supply. People die every day, Dawn replied coldly. At least this way, their land will have served a purpose. Karen checked her watch impatiently. Enough talking. We need those statements now. And then we need to clean this up and go. The corporate jet is waiting. Dawn nodded, pulling papers from his jacket pocket. Sign these. They're simple declarations stating that you fabricated evidence against me and Meridian Partners due to personal grievances. And if we refuse? Melissa asked. Dawn nodded to Karen, who raised her gun, pointing it directly at Rachel. Then we start reducing the number of problems we need to solve, one by one. The room fell silent, the only sound the ticking of Rachel's kitchen clock, ironically one that Jerry had repaired for her last Christmas. Tick, 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 time running out. And then, so faint we almost missed it. the wail of distant sirens. Don's head snapped up at the sound. "Check outside," he ordered James, who hurried to the window. "Police cars," James reported, his voice shaking. "At least 3 of them, turning onto the street." Karen's gun wavered slightly. "How? The accident should have tied them up for hours." "It doesn't matter," Don snapped. "We need to go. Now." He turned to us, his face hard. "This isn't over. Remember that." "What about them?" Karen gestured toward us with the gun. Don's eyes were cold. "No loose ends." In that moment, with perfect clarity, I knew he intended to kill us all before fleeing. I saw the same realization dawn on Jerry's face, on Melissa's, on Rachel's. And then several things happened at once. Jerry lunged across the table, knocking Dawn off balance. Melissa threw her coffee mug at Karen's hand, sending the gun clattering to the floor. I dived for it, my fingers closing around. The cold metal as James Peterson made a decision, grabbing Karen by the arm and yanking her away from me. "Enough!" he shouted. "No one's killing anyone." I stood, the gun shaking in my hands but pointed steadily at Don, who had recovered his balance and was glaring at James with pure hatred. "You traitor," he snarled. James shook his head. "I agreed to help you buy properties, Don. I agreed to keep an eye on Jerry. I never agreed to murder." Sirens grew louder, now unmistakably heading for Rachel's house. "How did they find us?" Karen demanded, struggling against James's grip. "I called them," James admitted. "After I heard what you were planning, I couldn't be part of this anymore." Don lunged toward the door, but Jerry was faster, old but still spry, blocking his path. "It's over. Don. The truth is out." Blue and red lights flashed through the windows as police cars pulled into the driveway. Officers with drawn weapons approached the house, responding to James's urgent call about armed suspects threatening civilians. The next minutes passed in a blur of shouted commands, raised hands, and the cold click of handcuffs. Don and Karen were taken into custody, their faces masks of fury and disbelief. James went willingly with another officer, already beginning to explain his role and cooperation. Diana Zhang arrived shortly after, striding into the kitchen with a look of grim satisfaction. "We got them," she announced. "The raid on Meridian Partners was successful. We found backup servers with all the incriminating data they thought they'd destroyed, plus documents, linking them to similar schemes in other communities." Relief washed over me, so powerful I had to sit down. Jerry squeezed my shoulder, his weathered face breaking into the first genuine smile I'd seen since before this all began. "It's really over?" Melissa asked, her voice small with disbelief. Diana nodded. Don Carlisle, Karen Whitmore, and their corporate backers are facing multiple federal charges: fraud, racketeering, environmental crimes, and now attempted murder. They won't see freedom for decades, if ever. In the days that followed, we learned the full extent of the conspiracy. 17 homeowners had been victims of forged documents or coercion. The aquifer contamination was even worse than Jerry had discovered, with toxic chemicals having leached into the groundwater for years from the abandoned factory site. Don and Karen had been planning to sell the water rights to an overseas conglomerate for nearly $500 million, with kickbacks to local officials who had looked the other way. The investigation expanded to include the county commissioner, the building inspector, and even Sheriff Reynolds, all of whom had received generous consulting fees from Meridian Partners. Willow Creek was in shock. Neighbors who had known each other for decades gathered in stunned groups on porches and driveways, trying to process how their community had been targeted, how people they trusted had been willing to poison them for profit. 2 weeks after Dawn and Karen's arrest, we held a town meeting in the same square where Jerry's fake memorial had taken place. But this time, Jerry himself stood at the microphone, very much alive, explaining to his astonished neighbors what had happened and why he had gone into hiding. "I didn't want to deceive you all," he told the crowd, "but I discovered something terrible happening to our home, and the people behind it were willing to kill to keep it secret." I sat in the front row, watching my neighbors' faces as they absorbed the truth. Shock, anger, betrayal, but also something else: determination. As Jerry explained the contamination issue and the cleanup that would be necessary, I saw people nodding, whispering to each other, already planning how to restore their community. After Jerry finished speaking, Martha Sullivan took the microphone. "We've been offered a choice," she announced. "The state is willing to buy out any residents who want to leave, given the contamination concerns. Or we can stay, work with the environmental agencies on remediation, and rebuild Willow Creek the right way. A murmur went through the crowd. Leave our homes? The very idea seemed impossible to many. Mrs. Peterson stood up, her voice wavering but clear. My son James made a terrible mistake getting involved with Don Carlisle, but he tried to make it right in the end. I'm staying. This is my home, contamination and all. One by one, others joined her. The Johnsons, the Millers, Mrs. Fitzgerald, who had moved back after learning her property sale had been fraudulent. We're staying too, I said, standing beside Jerry. If you'll have us back. The response was immediate. Applause, embraces, tears. These people, our neighbors for decades, welcomed us back not as heroes, but as family who had been temporarily lost and now found. That night, sitting on my own porch for the first time in weeks, I marveled at how quickly life could change, how a letter handed to me at a memorial service had set in motion events that exposed corruption, prevented ecological disaster, and ultimately brought a community closer together. Jerry joined me, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. Penny for your thoughts? I smiled, accepting the glass, just thinking about how much has changed, and how much is still the same. He nodded, settling into the chair beside mine. Willow Creek will never be exactly what it was, but maybe it can be something better. Something more honest, I agreed, without artificial smiles, hiding real dangers. We sat in companionable silence, watching fireflies begin to dot the evening air. The neighborhood around us was quiet but not silent. Children's laughter from the Jenkins yard, the Thompsons working on their garden, Mrs. Fitzgerald walking her dog. Life, resilient and determined, continuing despite everything. You know, Jerry said after a while, when I wrote that letter and arranged for it to be delivered to you, I never expected all this. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. Truth has a cost. I echoed his words from that tense morning in Rachel's hallway. But it's worth it. He raised his glass in a small toast. To truth, then, and to neighbors who actually deserve the name. I clinked my glass against his, feeling for the first time in months that Willow Creek might truly be home again. 6 months passed, transforming Willow Creek in ways I never could have imagined. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn gave way to winter, bringing with it both challenges and unexpected gifts for our healing community. The EPA established a permanent office in our community center, overseeing what they estimated would be a 3-year remediation project for our contaminated aquifer. The process was disruptive. Streets torn up for testing, the constant hum of equipment, and weekly community meetings to discuss progress reports filled with technical jargon. But amid the inconvenience, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had once barely acknowledged each other beyond polite nods began working together. When the Andersons' basement flooded during the initial groundwater testing, 6 families showed up with pumps and mops without being asked. When Mrs. Fitzgerald needed transportation to her medical appointments, a volunteer driving schedule materialized overnight. It's like we've remembered how to be a community again, Martha observed one crisp December morning as we distributed flyers for the next town meeting. She had been elected interim town council president after the previous members resigned in disgrace when their connections to Don were exposed. I think we're learning it for the first time, actually, I replied. At least the real version of it. The trials of Don Carlisle and Karen Whitmore dominated national news for weeks. Corporate fraud combined with environmental crimes and attempted murder created a media sensation that put our small town on the map for all the wrong reasons. Journalists camped out on street corners, seeking interviews with the neighbors who cracked the case. Jerry and I declined most requests, but we did speak to one reporter from a respected environmental journal, hoping to raise awareness about similar schemes happening in other communities. The resulting article led to investigations in 3 other states where Meridian Partners had operations. On a personal level, life settled into a new rhythm. Jerry moved back into his house, though he kept the lake cabin as a retreat. Everyone needs a backup plan, he'd say with a wink, but we both knew the real reason. Some scars don't heal completely. Some fears linger. Melissa stayed in Seattle, but visited regularly, helping us establish a community advocacy group to support other neighborhoods facing corporate exploitation. The woman who had once been terrified of her ex-husband now testified fearlessly against him in court, her voice never wavering as she detailed years of manipulation and threats. As for me, I found myself unexpectedly at the center of community organizing efforts. My kitchen table became command central for everything from environmental research to planning the winter festival that would replace the now tainted traditions Karen had controlled for years. "You found your calling," Rachel told me during one of her weekend visits. "I've never seen you so energized." She was right. At 67, when many of my peers were slowing down, I had discovered a sense of purpose that had eluded me even in my younger years. The satisfaction of fighting for something meaningful, of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. It filled a void I hadn't recognized until it was gone. The winter solstice brought our first community celebration since the scandal broke. A simple gathering in the town square with hot chocolate, homemade cookies, and a ceremonial planting of evergreen saplings that would eventually replace the old oak tree that had died from root contamination. As I helped serve cider to my neighbors, I spotted James Peterson hovering at the edge of the crowd, uncertain of his welcome. After testifying against Don and Karen, he had pled guilty to lesser charges and received probation rather than prison time. He'd been living with his mother, rarely venturing out in public. I approached him, 2 cups of cider in hand. "It's good to see you here, James." He accepted the cup with surprise in his eyes. "I wasn't sure I should come." "You belong here as much as anyone," I said firmly. "More than some, considering you helped save our lives in the end. After endangering them in the first place," he countered, his expression pained. "I keep thinking about how differently it could have ended if I hadn't called the police." "But you did call them," I reminded him. "That's what matters." He looked around at the gathering, his gaze lingering on the children playing near the saplings. I never knew what Don was planning with the water, not until it was almost too late. I thought it was just about real estate. Development making the town more modern. Many people were fooled, I said gently. "The important thing is learning from it." James nodded slowly. "I'd like to help with the remediation project. I'm a hydrologist. Did you know that? It's why Don recruited me in the first place. Maybe I could do some good now." "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said, and meant it. Redemption was part of healing too, for individuals as well as communities. As the evening progressed, Jerry found me near the refreshment table, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Quite a turnout," he observed, nodding toward the crowd. "Different from the last time we gathered here." I thought back to that gray afternoon when a stranger had handed me a letter beside an empty casket. "Very different," I agreed. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Jerry said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "The remediation committee is planning a trip to that conference in Portland next month, the one about community-led environmental restoration projects." "Yes, I'm helping organize it," I replied, wondering why he seemed so hesitant. "Well, I was thinking, that is, if you wouldn't mind." He cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could extend the trip a few days, see the coast, as more than neighbors." I stared at him, warmth rising to my face that had nothing to do with my cider. "Gerald Doyle, are you asking me on a date?" His eyes crinkled with amusement and something more vulnerable. "I believe I am, Beatrice Monroe. Seems like life's too short and too unpredictable to waste any more time." Dancing around it. Before I could answer, Martha called for everyone's attention, announcing the lighting of the Community Unity Candle, a new tradition to replace Karen's elaborate but exclusionary ceremonies. "We'll continue this conversation later," I told Jerry with a smile that must have conveyed my answer, because his face lit up brighter than any holiday display. As we gathered in a circle, passing the flame from candle to candle until the entire square glowed with warm light, I looked at the faces of my neighbors. Some I'd known for decades, others new since the changes began. All of them united not by artificial social hierarchies or forced conformity, but by something more genuine: shared purpose, shared challenges, shared hope. In that moment, I understood that Willow Creek hadn't just survived a crisis, it was being reborn from one, and somehow, impossibly, I had found myself reborn along with it. Spring arrived with a symbolism that wasn't lost on any of us, new growth emerging from soil that was slowly being healed. The first phase of the groundwater remediation project showed promising results, with contaminant levels dropping significantly in test wells. Throughout the neighborhood, Don Carlisle and Karen Whitmore received their sentences in late April, 25 years and 18 years respectively, with additional charges still pending in other jurisdictions. The corporate executives behind Meridian Partners faced similar fates, along with billions in fines and mandated cleanup costs. "Justice served," Melissa remarked when the news broke, though the shadows in her eyes suggested that no punishment could truly make up for what had been done. To her, to our community, to the environment we all shared, justice had come in other forms too. The homeowners who had been victimized by fraudulent sales received their properties back, along with compensation for their troubles. The state established a special healthcare monitoring program for Willow Creek residents, ensuring that any long-term effects from the contamination would be caught early and treated properly. Life had acquired a new rhythm: town meetings every Thursday, remediation updates on Mondays, community project days on weekends. My garden, once my private sanctuary, now hosted gatherings of neighbors learning to grow vegetables in raised beds with imported soil, while the ground beneath continued its slow recovery. And then there was Jerry. Our trip to Portland had indeed extended to include those days at the coast. Days filled with long walks on foggy beaches, evenings spent talking by firelight, and the gradual transformation of a 30-year friendship into something deeper and more precious. "We should have done this years ago," he told me one evening as we sat on my porch swing, watching the neighborhood children ride bikes along the street, a sight that had once been common but had disappeared during Dawn's reign. "Maybe we weren't ready years ago," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "Maybe we needed all of this to happen first." He considered this, his engineer's mind always appreciating logic, a catalyst for change. Exactly. 1 year to the day after Jerry's fake memorial service, we held another gathering in the town square. This time, there was no casket, no forced solemnity, no hidden agendas. Instead, there were tables laden with potluck dishes, children playing tag between newly planted trees, and a small podium where various community members would speak about the journey we'd undertaken together. Martha opened the proceedings, her teacher's voice carrying easily across the crowd. 1 year ago, our community was living a lie. Several lies, in fact. Today, we gather in truth, in hope, and in genuine fellowship. Applause rippled through the gathering. I sat in the front row, Jerry beside me, his hand warm around mine. Various speakers followed, James Peterson discussing the remediation. Progress, Mrs. Fitzgerald sharing her experience of reclaiming her home, the EPA coordinator praising Willow Creek's collaborative spirit. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of our collective experience. Then Martha called my name. I hadn't planned to speak, but she had insisted. "Your perspective matters, Bea. You were at the center of uncovering the truth." I approached the podium, slowly, looking out at the faces of my neighbors, faces that now held genuine warmth rather than Karen's artificial pleasantness or Dawn's calculated charm. "A year ago," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I sat not far from this spot and received a letter that changed everything. It told me that a man I thought was dead wasn't dead at all, and that people I thought I knew were hiding. Terrible secrets." I paused, gathering my thoughts. That day began a journey that was frightening, dangerous, and at times heartbreaking. We discovered that people we had trusted had betrayed us in the worst possible ways. We learned that our homes, our water, our very community had been targeted for exploitation. Nods throughout the crowd, some eyes glistening with tears as people remembered. "But we discovered something else too," I continued. "We discovered our own courage. We discovered the power of standing together against those who would harm us. We discovered that truth, even when painful, is always better than comfortable lies." I looked toward Jerry, drawing strength from his encouraging smile. The writer Rebecca Solnit once said that, "Inside the word emergency is emerge. From an emergency, new things come forth. From our emergency has emerged a stronger community, deeper connections, and a commitment to protecting each other that I believe will endure long after the last traces of contamination are gone from our soil." Applause broke out, surprising me with its enthusiasm. I wasn't finished, though. "There's one more thing I'd like to share today," I said when the clapping subsided. When I opened Jerry's letter that day, I was terrified, but I was also, in some strange way, awakened. For years after my husband died, I had been merely existing, tending my garden, keeping to myself, watching life pass by. The crisis that engulfed our community could have pushed me further into isolation. Instead, it connected me to all of you in ways I never expected. I looked out at the faces watching me, Mrs. Peterson wiping away tears, James standing tall despite the weight of his past mistakes, Martha nodding encouragement, and dozens of others whose lives had become intertwined with mine. I've learned that it's never too late to begin again. Never too late to stand up for what's right. Never too late to open your heart to new possibilities. My eyes found Jerry's again, and the love I saw there gave me courage for my final words. So today, as we commemorate how far we've come, I'm grateful, Not just for the justice we've achieved or the healing that's underway, but for the reminder that life's most beautiful chapters can begin in its most challenging moments. The applause this time was accompanied by a few whistles and cheers. As I returned to my seat, Jerry squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with pride and something more. The formal portion of the gathering gave way to music, food, and conversation. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit throughout the square, creating pools of golden light. Children chased fireflies while their parents chatted in comfortable groups, sharing food and stories with equal generosity. Jerry and I found ourselves at the edge of the celebration, watching the community we had helped save enjoy the simple pleasure of being together without fear or pretense. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I left that letter for you, I never imagined all this. I just wanted to protect you, to make sure someone knew the truth. And look what happened, I replied, gesturing toward the gathering. One truth led to another and another until we found our way back to something real, something better than what we had before, he added. I nodded, leaning against him as the evening air cooled. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't just expose what's wrong. It clears the way for what's right. In the center of the square, someone had started playing a guitar, and others were joining in the song. Voices of different ages and abilities blending in imperfect but genuine harmony. No rehearsed performance like Karen's carefully orchestrated community events, just people making music together because it brought them joy. I thought about the empty casket that had once stood where children now played. I thought about the letter that had started everything, written in Jerry's shaky hand. I thought about the fear we had faced, the dangers we had overcome, and the new beginning we had found. Not just for our community, but for ourselves. Silence protects liars, I murmured, remembering something Jerry had written in his notes. Truth protects communities. And brings them back to life, Jerry added, his arm warm around my shoulders as we stood together, watching our neighbors, our true neighbors, celebrate not just their survival, but their renewal. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky above Willow Creek, I knew with absolute certainty that while our journey had begun with deception and danger, it had led us to something precious and real, a place where people could trust the ground beneath their feet and the hands extended in friendship, where the water ran clear and the truth flowed freely, a place we could truly call home.